When radical students on university campuses say they feel threatened, do they really? That's my subject on today's Fiamengo File. I'm Janice Fiamengo of the University of Ottawa. In a recent article for the Wall Street Journal, American author and journalist Heather McDonald discussed the appalling student thuggery we've seen recently on college campuses. McDonald is, amongst other things, a critic of the Black Lives Matter movement and therefore not very popular on university campuses in the United States. And when she tried to speak at Claremont McKenna College in Claremont, California in early April 2017, a group of Black Lives Matter supporters attended her talk and surprised the assembled audience with their civility, articulateness, and cogency of argument. No, of course not. The usual thing happened. An uncivil protest shut down the talk, and campus security essentially did nothing about it. McDonald ended up giving a live stream version of the talk to an empty room, but even then, BLM activists disrupted it with shouts and curses. The details of this kind of thing have become so common as to prompt little public interest. Hundreds of protesters assembled at the entranceways to the building, stopping attendees from getting inside. Anyone who tried to push past them was repelled, and according to the campus newspaper, at one point, quote, a crowd of white students screaming, "Fuck white supremacy, fuck white supremacy," pushed an elderly white professor away from the building entrance, end quote. Well, isn't it lovely to think of rich white kids so fired up by the idea of racial equality? So what makes such bigotry and incivility so popular amongst students? The students, at least the black students, claim that they are, quote, under threat, that their actions are not violent intimidation, but necessary self-defense in an urgent fight for their very right to exist. Do they believe their own rhetoric? In the Wall Street Journal article, Heather McDonald disagreed with the idea popularized by Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff in their article, The Coddling of the American Mind, an interesting article, by the way, where they explain the attempt to silence offensive or hurtful speech as stemming from an emotional or psychological weakness caused by students being infantilized by overprotective parents and therefore incapable of dealing with conflict in an adult manner. McDonald doesn't really buy that explanation. She asks, if risk-averse child-rearing is the source of the problem, why aren't heterosexual white male students demanding safe spaces? She alleges instead that, quote, campus intolerance is at root not a psychological phenomenon, but an ideological one based on, quote, a worldview that sees Western culture as endemically racist and sexist. So to extrapolate from McDonald's argument, when students claim that their existence is threatened by a dissenting opinion, that's an act of clever ideological manipulation, not a genuine expression of fear. But it seems that McDonald and Haidt and Lukianoff are both correct. There is a psychological as well as an ideological component to our present crisis. Yes, we have a cultural Marxist ideology that sees Western culture as thoroughly corrupt and hates heterosexual white men above all because they have traditionally been its standard bearers. And the rejection of all that the West has created is both an expression of and a contributing cause of psychological pathology. So ideology and psychological abnormality become inextricable, creating cases in which radical activists are both deadly earnest and, in a sense, manifestly fake. Let's look at one example of a claim of existential threat, which from a common sense standpoint is thoroughly irrational, yet is a passionately held belief of many radical students today. Following Heather McDonald's visit to Claremont McKenna, 3 black students and a couple dozen co-signatories wrote an angry letter to the outgoing president of Pomona College, one of the Claremont colleges, protesting his defense of free speech and claiming that people like Heather McDonald should never be allowed on the Claremont campuses again because their words, quote, condone violence against black people, end quote. Now, we've heard this line of argument before, of course, but this letter is truly remarkable. in the degree of its frenzied expostulation, and I encourage everyone to read it. In a long rant, the students make no attempt to defend their contention that engaging with MacDonald is, quote, a form of violence against black students, and indeed they make no attempt to defend their libelous contention that MacDonald is not only a racist, but actually a racial exterminationist, which they repeat multiple times, alleging that she denies, quote, the right of black people to exist, end quote. More than that, she is, according to the letter writers, in an almost laughably comprehensive list, wait for it, a fascist, a white supremacist, a war hawk, a transphobe, a queerphobe, a classist, and ignorant of interlocking systems of domination that produce the lethal conditions under which oppressed peoples are forced to live, end quote. One has to wonder whether the letter writers have read anything Heather MacDonald has actually written. They certainly don't refer to even a single utterance of hers to anchor their exponentially proliferating list of her sins of thought. The letter is a melodramatic tirade against all things white supremacists, which include apparently, and this is what is most stunning and bizarre about the letter, include the ideal of objectivity and the search for truth. That's right. The search for truth is an aspect of white supremacism. Here's part of what the students say as preamble to their demand that speakers who disagree with their fanatical views be barred from their college, and that everyone in the university administration and on the college newspaper has to offer them an abject apology. Here it is. Historically, white supremacy has venerated the idea of objectivity and wielded a dichotomy of subjectivity versus objectivity as a means of silencing oppressed peoples. The idea that there is a single truth, the truth, is a construct of the Euro-West that is deeply rooted in the Enlightenment, which is a movement that also described black and brown people as both subhuman and impervious to pain. This construction, the construction, I guess, of the search for truth, I'm not sure, is a myth, and white supremacy, imperialism, colonization, capitalism, and the United States of America are all of its progeny. The idea that the truth is an entity for which we must search in matters that endanger our abilities to exist in open spaces is an attempt to silence oppressed peoples, end quote. Well, it's hard to know how to respond to a statement defining the search for truth as a white supremacist, colonialist, and imperialist plot, and equally hard to calculate the level of intentional rhetorical exaggeration or sincere delusion that the letter might manifest. Do the students really believe that the primary products of the Enlightenment have been dehumanization, silencing, and the subjugation of brown and black peoples? Which non-Enlightenment societies throughout history have done better at reforming their own errors and extending freedom and prosperity to a majority of their members? I'm not sure what the students' preferred society would be. North Korea, perhaps, or Iran, Saudi Arabia, China, South Africa, Venezuela. Well, all that is clear is that these students, who are privileged members of their society attending a prestigious post-secondary institution, an opportunity many poor whites in the U.S. are denied, seem excessively pleased with themselves for rejecting the core principles of their culture, principles historically responsible for creating individual opportunity, security, and material abundance like no other culture on earth ever provided for its citizens, and for which they obviously feel not one bit of respect or even awareness, it seems, only contempt. One might point out to the letter writers that rejecting truth is a bizarre tactical move, making it impossible for them to claim that their contentions about history and oppression have any greater truth value than the contentions of the people they wish to bar from campus. Or one might note that people oppressed by white supremacy don't tend to behave as these students do, inviting confrontation with administrators and security personnel and making reckless defamatory accusations against intellectual leaders in their society. At some level, they must know that far from being imperiled, they themselves are protected and catered to as few other social groups have ever been in recorded history. Their aggressive intolerance and preposterous immaturity and ignorance are placated, forgiven, and even encouraged. But on another level, They do believe their own hype, and their self-pitying rage has real effects, most obviously in their willingness to break the law and even to use violence in the name of what they say is resistance, as we've seen on so many campuses lately, and more generally in their demand that innumerable special concessions and privileges be given to them to accommodate the chains and shackles they claim that their society has forced them to wear. This letter testifies to how easy it is to destroy a culture. You do it by teaching a significant minority of its members, especially those who will take positions of influence in journalism, education, social policy, government, and the law. You teach them that they live in one of the worst countries in the world. You teach them that there isn't anything in their culture's traditions or historical record worth cherishing, and that anyone who loves that culture is an oppressor who must be silenced and effectually destroyed. And universities have been teaching this for decades in our humanities and social sciences programs, and we shouldn't be surprised when students act on what they've been taught.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please support us on Patreon. If even half of our subscribers gave us $1 per month, we'd be well on our way to creating more and better content. And don't forget to subscribe to us on Studio Brule.